You're listening to Mitolife Radio. This is episode 57, and today I'm speaking with Xiren Kenny. Xiren Kenny actually recovered from Lyme disease, which is incredible. And if you're not familiar, Lyme disease is a really freaky modern problem that we're dealing with. A lot of people say it's biological warfare. Dr. Cass Ingram, that I've had on the show, talks a lot about that on YouTube. And the purpose of this episode isn't to scare you. And Xiren goes into that in the show. He's of the same mindset. I actually like talking about this because it takes the focus off just treating a condition. Like, I get messages all day long, like, what do you recommend for this, Matt? And I'm not into that. I'm into whole body health, right? Just putting the whole body back into balance. And so it never works to just chase symptoms. You know, like I had Josh Rubin on, and he's not a fan of that either. That's not a way to go about health. If you have symptoms, you should make major changes in your life. And that might even involve moving locations, moving jobs, leaving your job, leaving your relationship, whatever it is. You have to assess your whole life, right? Because there's definitely stressors that are non-physical, right? If you're in a bad relationship or you're in a bad environment, there's only so much you can do to mitigate that, right? That's a big reason why I moved out of the city to Idaho, just to get away from all of the non-native EMFs, because they were really starting to affect me. And I think a lot of people are starting to feel that. And I believe the healthier you get, the more you can feel it. And we do have mitigations. Like magnesium is a big one for me. I like the Blue Shield, the Somavedic, and just keeping your stress low with carbs and animal protein. But this episode's pretty cool because we go down a lot of different rabbit holes, and it's obvious that we have different spiritual beliefs, which is okay. Right, I've had people on this show before, my friend David Limaker, other people that have different spiritual beliefs. That's okay. But you'll notice that he brings up Rudolf Steiner quite a bit, who I'm not a fan of at all. And that's fine. We mostly stick on the topic of physical health, which is what I'm interested in sharing primarily with this show, and give you a lot of tools that you can use to rebalance your body after experiencing something like Lyme disease. So here we go. Enjoy. All right, I'm here with Xiren Kenny. Welcome to the show.
Good to have you. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It took me a second to get your name. You were saying what was the story with Xiren?
Yeah, well, almost no one pronounces the X like an S or a C, but it's an Irish name. My dad is a Dolphins Barn Dubliner, so it's an Irish name with a bit of a creative spelling, and the original Latin X as an S, so Xiren. And Justin, of course, who I know we've met each other through, he pronounces my name right the first time, and then it starts being Xerox down the road.
Xerox, welcome to the show. Yeah, it's not good.
Hi, Xiren.
Yeah. So, yeah, I actually found you, I think, through just the YouTube rabbit hole, as a lot of people have actually found me. It's just they search something on YouTube and my face pops up, and your face popped up when I was searching, I think, SOTA, or I was searching Lyme or different things, micropulsing. And I just kind of got into you had some really, really high quality, like little 20-minute, almost like mini documentary videos that I enjoyed. And your information on Lyme disease is some of the best I found online. So I figured,
nice.
Like 50 shows in on Mitolife Radio, why not have a Lyme expert on? I haven't done it yet. Dr. Cass Ingram is he wrote a book called The Lyme Disease Cure, and I think he's pretty on it, but his solution is just oregano. And I think, it's good. That's definitely a good thing to use, but it should be kind of multi-pronged, right?
Yeah. I was just, as soon as, when people tell me some of these interesting different approaches, especially when it comes to like a singular thing, when I see that if someone's having, let's say, success with a singular item, then by modern definition of Lyme disease, they're addressing and perhaps hitting one of the layers. This would be like a retroviral or a viral layer with the oregano, and possibly also a mold layer. So that would tell me that, if somebody was using that product alone and getting results, that some of their symptoms might be mostly related to what that oregano could hit, because it's definitely not going to unload. I made a short list before this of all the different layers that there can be with Lyme. When you're talking about true Lyme disease, like, you can have hundreds and hundreds of layers aside from hundreds and hundreds of comorbidities, or what's called the co-infections. So anyhow, I don't know his approach. I've never heard of that before, but like, I've never found one thing that worked for everyone, because everyone's layers are different and everyone can have a lot fewer or a lot more. In my case, I have the Russian doll version of layers, the infinite. Oh, we take this one out. Look, there's more and there's more. So we've had to get incredibly. I was the case that never would have gotten well without the very particular miracles that lined me up to be able to live a life where I could research this problem from a million different perspectives, and then really, in fact, be part of the development of treatments for it. So that's how that worked.
Interesting. Well, we might as well start with where Lyme disease started, because I've heard Cass talk about it being a definitive bioweapon, and then I've heard from other people challenging that and saying it's maybe a conspiracy or something. But I mean, Plum Island definitely played a role in its creation, right?
Yes. So Plum Island was Plum Island's proximity to Lyme, Connecticut, being just, the near island to Lyme, Connecticut, and definitely the outbreak of juvenile arthritis that was first seen there. And then we have this, as the official story went, we have Willy Borgdorfer, this incredible national hero that goes in, and in a reasonably short amount of time, from the conception of an illness to the discovery of the bacteria or viral component behind it, can typically take decades. And he did it in under 10 years. So that was one of those, like, wow, he's a national hero. Look how quickly he found it. And he found this one little spirochete, and surely that's the whole shebang. And it turns out, so it's not a conspiracy anymore. It was actually Chris Newby, the Stanford medical research journalist, that just published this book last year. And at the end of 2019, around August, this book literally sparked what was the second or third most largest story in the mainstream news. So this is now on the record. This is no longer conspiracy theory, because, right, conspiracy theory means you're thinking about it and you don't have the evidence of it. In this case, it is full-blown, actual, documented, on-the-record conspiracy, because it turns out Willy Borgdorfer, the book is all based on this is an incredible book, by the way. She's actually, most of the, I don't read fiction. I haven't read fiction or science fiction since college. So you're up to it's up to the talent or the skill level of the writer, whether they're any good. And mostly it's not very great. She's, in fact, incredible as a writer, but she got all the posthumous notes of Willy Borgdorfer, as in Borrelia burgdorferi, the namesake of the little spirochete that's supposed to be, for 35 years was thought to be what defined Lyme disease, is they can find the spirochete, which is tricky to find. Well, it turns out Willy Borgdorfer was not a national hero. Willy Borgdorfer was part of the group of labs. This is all incredibly well documented. And like I said, it was a massive national story in the US, although nothing ever came of it. But it was it was on the record, and they were, petitioning the Pentagon to say, hey, can you tell us more about the origins of this disease? But again, what she reveals very clearly, very directly from a regretful posthumous Willy Borgdorfer, is that he was part of the bioweapons lab making it. So when he said, hey, there's only this one spirochete we've found, and that is Lyme disease, and for 35 years everybody chased it with antibiotics, and it was hit or miss at best, that's because the truth was they were stuffing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of modified and weaponized creatures, and spirochetes were just one of the many. There were quetzals and babesia and all these other things, and they were stuffing them into parasites, particularly the smallest forms of parasites, and then that's what they were feeding to all of the different vectors that can bite you and spread it. And it was not just ticks. And they've known that for a long time. So basically, it's been every creature that can bite you was lined up and fed with these cocktails of parasites that were loaded to the gills with rickettsals and with all these other horrible things, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, a million different things, right? The co-infections or the comorbidities of Lyme disease were literally included. And so his job was to divert your attention from all of those other aspects. So everyone's looking at this one little spirochete and saying, that's Lyme disease. So in fact, the origin, as you can see, brings up quite a bit of, but it's on the record now. So we know this is no longer just some accident or whatever. Like, we have the people that were working on it that came out, said there were a network of university labs that were connected through the earliest forms of the internet, which dramatically predate what we got. Do you know what I mean? By 30, 40 years predate what we saw in the, in the late 80s and 90s. And this was how they were able to devise and develop these organisms. And so that's, and it's no mystery, because that's literally, any of us that have been in the game for more than a minute, that's exactly what you see. You see that everybody has not just the spirochete, but they have, if you look in the cancer research, because I have to do that too. I'm dealing with a father we're going through that with him. And all of their research, you look at the best guys that are producing results with cancer, and they say, show me this kind of cancer, show me this kind of cancer, and I'll show you the 4 parasites you'll find every time in that person. Show me a pancreatic cancer, I'll show you the 3 parasites you're always, not that there's not all other kinds too, but I'll always find these 3 causing, you know what I mean? Like, we deworm our dogs, we deworm our pets, but we don't do that for ourselves. So they really, by hiding all the other aspects of Lyme and making it about a single spirochete, they really blurred the picture, and they really hurt a lot of people for a very long time. That's the history. And like I said, it's not up for debate. Yeah. The whole idea was it was the Senate begging the Pentagon, show us how you weaponize this, right? That was the news story, was, hey, this came out. Now we want to know, what did you load in these ticks? I'm sure we're never going to get an answer, and we'll probably never see that story again. But it's on the record. It's not debatable. It's not a theory.
It seems like a depopulation kind of strategy. I mean, because what was the premise might have been, to release this in the Middle East to fight terrorism, right? Or something like that. It's crazy.
Yeah. When, it's not a very effective depopulation tactic. It's too slow. Like a crippling. It's exactly. It's, there's a great movie, one of the very first ones I came across, and I remember it was, this guy had done incredible research and was way ahead of the time, but almost nobody knows about this movie. And I remember I even sent $20 in the mail to buy this movie and had no idea if anything, like, it was some old address. I didn't know if I was ever going to get a DVD. And then, like, a month or 2 later, I got a DVD of this thing. And it's called the 8 Ball. Is that what it's called? And it's about, basically, he's a Michigan resident, and his sister was too. And she started having all these horrible things, and they realized that the entire block had basically what was called MS. They were all diagnosed with MS because Lyme disease didn't exist in Michigan. Only until recently has it even been acknowledged. There's almost no Lyme literate doctors or mold literate doctors, and those are some of the worst places for it. So he does all this research, and he discovers that this is actually an incredibly simplified Nazi plan. This idea, it was just an idea that the Nazis would have employed. And then we have, after World War II, we have this grand amassing of all these Nazi scientists, very well known as Project Paperclip. And they put the head of tick-borne illness from, again, none of this is controversial. This is all on the record. This is nothing, everything that I'm saying can be verified quite easily. So they put Dr. Eric Traub in charge of Plum Island off the coast of Lyme, Connecticut. So that's where, where it originally seemed to get its attention. But again, I don't at all believe it was limited to that. We have stories. Chris Newby, the writer of Bitten, has personally heard stories of people dropping actual Lyme infested ticks over the sugar fields of Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So long before, we would have seen this. Trying to, that, and the idea was you cripple, and that's what I was saying, it's the Nazi plan. What you do is if you cripple half of the population, or even less than that, it doesn't take very much, then you have the other half of the population that has to attend to those people that are disabled.
Mm-hmm.
So in that, you basically can take over a country without dropping a bomb. You don't have to rebuild any infrastructure. You can basically go in and injure the people. And then without firing a bullet or destroying a building, you just walk in and everything's functional. You just take it over. So he put that out in his movie, Under the Eight Ball, I think is what it was called. And I remember thinking that is the wildest, craziest thing I've ever heard. And every aspect of his story has proven out, 10 or 15 years later, with Chris Newby's book, with all of those confessionals. It's very clear that that's exactly what the plan was. And that's exactly what has happened. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the clinics. When you're looking at people, they don't have one spirochete. They have everything in there. They have all these things. And they're disabled, and their whole family is rallied around taking care of them, or their whole family gets disabled, like, Daryl Hall's family.
Interesting. I like what you said about taking down a country without dropping a bomb. Because that's happened in Europe with like pornography. I mean, it could just start beaming pornography into a country, and this has been done. Pornography has been weaponized for sure. And that's how you demoralize a country, and then maybe put in some crippling factors like Lyme disease. And even my carpenter, I was telling him that I was going to interview you, and he said, "Yeah, I know of this guy where his wife got Lyme, and she cheated on her husband with the neighbor who was the guy's best friend." And he's like, "Hopefully it was the Lyme." I'm like, "Probably. I mean, because it really affects your faculties, right? How you think, how you connect with reality."
Absolutely. That's one of the earmarks of it. One of the main places I've been trained for many, many years, and then I've expanded dramatically, was always Dr. Klinghardt. He had the widest, as one practitioner, he always had the widest angle view on this. And it was very clear, like he was seeing this as somebody who came into it as a pain doctor, a general pain doctor in, the 70s and 80s. And mostly he's dealing with, spinal pain, and realizing, oh, guess what? It's these Lyme creatures, the spirochetes, are living in the spinal fluid. They're literally morphing into a different creature, like they're morphing into a different shape, and they're becoming undetectable as Lyme. But that's literally what's causing all of these back problems. So then he started trying to treat the Lyme. But anyway, in the meantime, he's learning about all of the mental changes that happen for these people. So he tended to see that he really thinks that there's actually that it's one of these good and bad things. It's obviously it's a horrible experience to go through, but that there's like the intelligence level he was noticing of a lot of people that were highly infected was these were very, very smart people. They also looked 20 years younger than they were. So that's an interesting positive side effect. And on the negative side, there are massive, massive changes to personality and anxieties and different mental facilities that were very obviously being targeted with these creatures. So that's, in my mind, it's almost a spiritual battle when it starts to attack and cut you off from higher possible dimensions. Or even when I would try and meditate and it closed my eyes and it was like I'd almost fall over. It was like a paint shaker effect. With my eyes closed, it should be dark and peaceful, and it's worse than with my eyes open. And these were all of the effects that you would notice with anybody with Lyme.
That's wild. One question I had that just came up was with with microscope. I used to have, or I still have a dark field microscope.
Nice.
And just for fun, I would prick my finger, and it's like looking into a whole nother world. It's like being under the ocean. You're just seeing this this world inside of your drop of blood. And is that an effective way? I guess that'd be kind of a effective, not really a practical way for someone to diagnose themselves. But when you see these like squiggly spirochetes in the blood, or not necessarily because they can burrow. Um,
Yes and yes, absolutely. Both, yes, they both can show up in the blood and they can hide from the blood. They don't prefer to stay in the blood. That
mm,
tends to be just when they're transferred initially into the
mm,
body through whatever creature bites. And again, it's not, I mean, ticks have gotten the bad rap and deer really have suffered for it. Like, let's slaughter all the deer. Well, it's really not the deer that are transferring this stuff. They're not even getting Lyme. It's the mice that are transferring it. It's the spider bites that are transferring it. It's the fleas on your dogs. It's if you have a cat, you have Bartonella. If you have a dog, you have Lyme disease. It's very simple, But the way I look at it is everybody has Lyme. That's not a problem. It's just when you move into mold, then you have an emotional, some emotional catastrophe, then you have whatever. And it's all about, these are the layers that are building up and obscuring your immune system from functioning properly. I feel like I didn't answer. Oh, back to the blood. Let's just say that. Yeah. So they can definitely, when they're transferred, they do initially tend to go through the blood, but they don't live there. They don't seem to like to live there for very long. They want to burrow deep. And, my goal isn't to, I realize that a lot of people are probably listening to this that have Lyme and are looking for answers and stuff. So I'm always cautious not to, I get excited because of the details and because we've found answers. But as I go down these paths, even myself, I kind of notice, like, I certainly wouldn't want to leave people with fear about this. We have to understand the mechanics, right? It's like, you got to get your hands greasy and oily to fix a car. Otherwise, you're just going to look at it and maybe you think you can stuff a corn cob down the carburetor and make it work. No, you have to understand the pistons and you have to understand, the drive shaft and the cam and all this. It's the same thing with Lyme. So I'm saying that not for you, Matt, and certainly not for me, but for the people listening or, hearing this information. I want to make sure, like, all these details don't turn into extra fear, because a lot of the Lyme people have that already. But anyway, that's just mostly, it's like a weird disclaimer I would like to say. But yeah, no,
no,
it can show up in the blood and it can definitely hide in the blood. And they tend to spin at about 98 RPM, and they are shaped like a little screw. So they just drill right through the body. They go right through the fascia. And there's been people that have like radio tagged them and studied them moving from, like a sheep's tongue to the genitals in 3 seconds.
wow.
So they can go right through you know what I mean? If they don't want to be seen somewhere, they'll move away from it. It's, but they tend to
Wow.
colonize. They tend not to move after a while. They tend to kind of fall into the big biofilms and the community clusters. And at that point, there's lots of easy ways to kill them. So, but again, Lyme, in my estimation, Lyme is like the least part of your problem. If you have Lyme disease, it's just a catch-all phrase in my book. You could have cancer, you could have multiple sclerosis, you could have whatever stupid title your Western doctor wants to put on it, right? But I look at Lyme as a modern 21st century definition. Now that we have acknowledged what it is, that it's a bioweapon, that it's so many different creatures that are stuffed inside of parasites, which were already a problem because we stopped treating ourselves for those. So no matter what your diagnosis is, Lyme or otherwise, a lot of the guys like Dr. Jay Davidson and Todd Watts are finding that, and Klinghardt and all these guys are finding that there's just an order you go in. You have to start with parasites. You start unloading the layers. The parasites are the buses that drive all these creatures. You start forcing them out. You start cleaning them out. And you go layer by layer with the metals, the glyphosate. In my dad's case, this is the list I made for my dad. Like we have to, it's just incredible. Like, we found that they have radium in their water. They're literally drinking radioactive water in their house in Warren, Michigan, this beautiful California style house. Not to mention they had Stachybotrys and Penicillium aspergillus, like two of the worst molds you can have in huge quantities. So we've all had all these exposures. It's just the level to which you've had them and how good you are at getting rid of the layers to get down on the bottom. But that's kind of an oversimplification of a modern Lyme, my definition of Lyme.
No, I like your approach. It's really logical and methodical. And I often start a lot of my friends or clients off with drinking and bathing water because people are drinking contaminated spring water or just Brita water, one of those little cheap $200 pitchers, whatever it is. And I'm I'm recommending the pristine hydro filter just because it's acid free, bicarbonate rich, contaminant free, and it's like it's you're getting real water. I don't think spring water is generally safe anymore, unless you could find primary water, but that's out of most people's hands because they're in the city or whatever. But yeah, that drinking water is just so overlooked. It's like, I mean, 70% of your body, it might be an important place to start, like a logical place.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of pristine hydro as well. Love those
Listen,
guys. I don't think there are any bigger water nerds that I've met personally, for sure.
yeah, oh yeah,
I have a whole house outfitted with that stuff. I outfitted my parents' house with it, and it's not enough for the radiation. So we had to find other things that would actually decontaminate the radiation, that's a wild story in and of itself. But no, I agree. When I think of like water, you know, I don't have there's not a good graphic. I'm just gonna have to make one someday. When I think of the amount of things to consider when you're trying to get well, like if symptoms have started, if your life has been interrupted, now is like hopefully this for some people that are maybe listening to your show that don't have Lyme, they like all this stuff is coming. Like the cancer rate, the official cancer numbers are 100% of people get cancer now, right? It used to be like, one of three women and half of men like a couple years ago. And now the numbers that are real are 100%. Plus, you have MIT professors coming out and saying dementia, Alzheimer's are 100% guarantee. And, if these were all really genetic diseases, they would be incredibly rare and they would, not be propagating like they are. But, we live in a world where 100%, and by the way, the 100% cancer rate does not include skin cancer. So we got to look at everything. I mean, if you're still on the fence, if those crazy trails up in the sky are actually normal weather patterns that, just look back at movies in the 70s, they're not there. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry, you might not have been born that long ago, but the movies are still there. You can look. And of course the research is very public too, that this is a 100-year program. The weather program's 100 years. And these chemicals are turning off the brain, right? And Klinghardt talks about it, like he just put out this great video a couple months ago that really showed the 4 key ingredients to how you shut off the brain. And really, he was actually talking about it as a spiritual paradigm, coming at it from a perspective of like Rudolf Steiner and what he said 100 years ago, which is something to the effect that corporations were going to learn how to disconnect us from our deeper spirituality. Klinghardt sees that as an attack on the pineal gland using 4 key ingredients. You have your fluorides in the water, right? Which is just incredibly calcifying for the pineal gland. You have these aluminum nanoparticulates that are a major part of the chemistry of how they can modify the weather. And if you want to read about that, then Alana Freeland's book, her stuff is the way to go on that one. Like nobody's got it closer than she's gotten it. Also, because she's a big mystery school and Steiner advocate too, she's looking at it from a really cool perspective. So now you've got this aluminum, but it can't quite get into the brain yet. So you need that glyphosate to create all those gap junctions so that things can permeate into the brain and take over those aspects of the mind and of the gut. And then, of course, the linchpin, what most people are catching on to, but a lot of people still are way behind they might be catching on to it, but they still use their cell phone. But the EMFs in our environment are the just add water to that whole disaster scenario. So whether or not people out there have looked at the literature, which is incredibly clear, if you get out of the mainstream doesn't seem to think anything's harmful for you that's harmful for you. And everything that's neutral is like going to kill, Uber's going to kill you. Your Uber driver is going to drag your corpse out to the sea or whatever, but don't worry about the sky. NASA thinks that those are literally calls the plane trails as actual clouds now. They consider them clouds when they follow them out. I mean, these are fundamental changes in the way we define the normal aspects of our life. But again, if we look at those 4 things, like Klinghardt was saying, those 4 things alone, we have to look at our water, we have to look at our food, we have to look at the air we're breathing. So I go to the extreme because obviously I can't be casual with the truth. I have a lot of people that are following my channel, and I'm literally my entire family is placing their lives in my hands. So I'm not casual with any of this stuff, and we have to deal with all of it. So I have my food is hand cooked by a friend, because then you've got that love component too. I mean, these things, like, let's just go juicy and make it all the way and have all organic ingredients, never touches plastic. It's delivered in jars. You have your water, you have your incredible water sources. But again, that might not be enough. You need to see, is the water you're drinking got radiation in it? Because as brilliant as the pristine hydro guys are, they don't have, some kind of way of getting rid of the radiation. So you got to look at every corner of the place you live, every corner of your life that you have. Be prepared to ionize your air, be prepared to filter your water, be prepared to deal with all these aspects. So we can't be casual. When you hear 100% dementia, Alzheimer's, and cancer, that's what, if we're unconscious. See, all of us that have Lyme, whose lives have been interrupted, this is the good news, is we're on the cutting edge. We're the ones that it hit first. So we got started earlier. We were the ones that went, oh yeah, I can't be casual with my food. I can't be casual with the mold in my house. I can't be casual with blah, blah, blah. Roll it out from there. The rest of y'all that are doing really well, they're looking for performance enhancements. You guys are missing the layers. You're not deworming the parasites. You're not going out there after the glyphosates and the different aspects of all this and looking at every corner. Now, you are obviously an exception in a lot of ways to that. But again, if I went into your life with a microscope, I'm sure I would find a big part of the picture that could still be added in there that we have to deal with the Lyme people. But my point is, what we're doing with the Lyme people, everyone needs that same thing. Like, everyone needs to be working on those layers, or we walk into these horrible statistics that are laying ahead of us. It was 100 years ago, it was 1 in 1,000 had cancer. That's what they report on The Truth About Cancer, is that 1 in 1,000 had cancer 100 years ago, right?
Speaking of The Truth About Cancer, I was going to ask you, MRET, like molecular resonance effect technology. I blast my water with that after it goes through the pristine hydro. I think it's patented, but people kind of say it's kind of a scam sometimes. I don't know. I kind of feel the difference.
Tell me more about it. I've not used that.
Okay, Igor Smirnov, he patented it, and
right. Yes. Sorry, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah,
with the pitcher, and you put ELF frequencies into it, and it's
I didn't realize there was ELF with that. I thought it was all vortexing because Igor was all about the structure of the water. I didn't know there was. That's interesting, though. Okay.
Yeah, supposedly it puts them all in a line, so it goes through the aquaporin gates easier into the cell, so it hydrates you better. But
okay, I didn't know the mechanics of it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Water. I mean, that's already happening in the pristine hydro filter. In fact, that's the one chemistry of their under the counter system that you don't replace, is their water structuring component. So it's a very one with, it's got like lots of rocks and crystals under it.
That's cool. That's cool that you're on that. Yeah, well said though. I really like what you said there. Let's jump into the Q&A just because there's so many.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll have a little fun offshoots from here.
Where did these come from?
From Instagram, actually. And so I just said I'm interviewing a Lyme expert, send in any questions. And you touched on a few of these already, but a lot of them are interesting. So my friend Josh Rubin actually asked, do you feel that it's commonly misdiagnosed? And another person asked if it's mistaken for Parkinson's or other neurological disorders.
Well, again, all of the disorders, all of today's stuff, I'd say a qualified answer I'd say well over 90% of any major diagnosis that someone could get for symptoms is going to be related to all of these layers building up. It's all the same stuff. If it's Parkinson's, it just means that the spirochetes moved into the brain faster, and that maybe you've got more shutdown of your nerves and of all of your capillaries and everything. All your veins are getting distorted. If you have heart problems, that might just mean you have a couple different parasites that moved in that are manufacturing issues there. So I guess the real answer is, when we think of the diagnoses, The diagnoses, in a lot of ways, let's say you get the correct diagnosis, according to today's Western thing, you get the correct diagnoses and you say, oh, I have Parkinson's, and you have the effects of Parkinson's. Well, then that just means your Western doctor, if he doesn't know what's going on, he's going to give you the drugs that address those symptoms. But none of it addresses the layers that have caused the problem in the first place. And those layers are there, whether you have the Lyme spirochete involved, as well as you have the rickettsials, maybe you have the Rocky Mountain spotted fever, maybe you have all these different things, like the nerve coating that dissolves from an MS patient. So you get a diagnosis as an MS because they are looking on an MRI, a magnetic resonance imaging of your brain, and they're seeing these little trails. They're seeing these little black lines. Well, what's that? That's the iron in your blood. That's when your veins have literally been devoured, that something has eaten the coating off of your nerves, and now the thing that was inside spilled out, your blood, and what's left behind is that trace of iron, which is picked up by magnetic resonance. And they say, oh, look, you have multiple sclerosis. Well, it doesn't tell you what caused it. Well, what we know causes the deterioration of that lining of your nerve. I mean, there's a lot of things, but for sure, it's mycotoxins from mold. It's the fart from your molds, the mold fart, as Jill Krista calls it. Dr. Jill Krista, I love that. But yeah, so we know, like, if you're in a moldy environment, like that mycotoxin, which the government loves to weaponize those, not that the one in your house is weaponized, but they love to make weaponized mycotoxins, because just because your house doesn't smell mildewy does not mean you don't have mold. It's not something you necessarily have to smell, but it will absolutely dissolve that coating of your lining. So now you have a multiple sclerosis. Well, do you have multiple sclerosis, or do you have Lyme, Parkinson's, cancer, Well, yes, the answer, so my answer is a little trickier than just a yes or no, but for sure, yes, of course. If you have sinusitis, that's mold. That's the most diagnosed injury to humans in the world. It's like the biggest diagnosis that anyone has, like that is more often given than any other, is sinusitis. It is a mold exposure that has colonized your sinuses. Well, that's just the beginning of the problem. So, down the road, anyway. So the answer is, even something as simple as sinusitis can be telling you that you're being exposed to something that down the road could be called Lyme, Parkinson's. Depending on which doctor you go to, they might find the Lyme spirochete and then go, oh, look, you have Lyme. Well, the Parkinson's, the MS guy is looking at the magnetic resonance imaging. So he's not looking at Lyme. He's not looking at anyway. So you're going to get whatever the guy diagnoses you as, and none of it's going to help you treat it if you're going to a traditional doctor. Almost like in most cases, none of it's going to get you there.
Interesting. Do you think the mycotoxins in coffee are a big deal? Because I went through the bulletproof thing, and then I was doing lab tested beans, and then
I know that Dave Asprey thinks so. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen there are some studies on mycotoxins in coffee, but I mean, it might be counteracted. It's kind of like the mercury in fish. The selenium kind of helps deal with that mercury, and there's kind of a balance, I think, found in foods that people don't realize.
Well, you bring up a good question. You bring up an interesting aspect of this too, which is, you could be able to get those same products. Maybe the coffee you have is totally mycotoxin free. Maybe it's like amazing. And maybe that same brand took a little longer to get somewhere else in the country, and now it actually is a little mildewy or moldy, and now it's got a detrimental quality to it. This is where I start showing, like, to me, the silver bullet is, when it comes to anything you're going to put in your body, is getting into the realm of the muscle testing, of the autonomic response testing, of the bioresonance scanning, of dowsing, of radiesthesia, whatever you want to call it. This is a method that I am shocked how few people use it in the mainstream, but how almost everybody knows about it. Almost everybody's come across a chiropractor who tried to push down their arm, and it was tough one minute, and then they handed them something, to choose a supplement and a dosage, and they pushed it down the next minute, and you can't resist. These are basic fundamental. These are real things that can tell you, is the coffee I'm about to take contaminated? You can develop these muscle tests. You can, whether it's I know people that have a rock solid lean test, like they lean on their feet forward or backward. It looks ridiculous. and we match it up with the answers they're getting with lab tests and with reality tests, and they're spot on. I mean, these are not up for debate anymore either. They're so new to most of us that we don't, a lot of people don't know much about them. But if you have a complex illness, these are the things, if you don't have them in the system somewhere, if you're not going to at least one of your practitioners that can look at the foods you're eating, that can look at the coffee you're drinking, that can look at the products you consume and the supplements you take, and help you assert the dosage for you and the products for you. Because even in the same family, my whole family, I'm taking care of my wife. Not my wife's functional; she's not been interrupted, but she has the same layers. We have to go through all those layers so she doesn't get interrupted down the road, so she doesn't have dementias and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And my parents, they're in hotter water, so we have to. But we're all from the same family, at least me and my parents and I, and we all have different products to test and different needs that we have. So that's a big piece for me, is I can't personally answer whether or not each product has whatever, but I don't think there is. I think like I said, the same brand somewhere a little longer across the country to get there might have a problem that it doesn't have in another place. So just like we're seeing with the water in Michigan being contaminated, but water in Colorado is not as bad in Denver. So anyhow, does that answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. No. On the show, I've interviewed Adam Bergstrom lunch, and he always has really funny Facebook posts. And he made me think of one. He said, "How can you tell if your muscle response tester is competent?" He said, "Give him the dirty 30 test." He's like, fill 10 capsules with vitamin C powder, 10 opaque capsules with syrup of emetic, I guess that's a poison, and then 10 with X-Lax, maximum strength. And then have him or her muscle test which 10 are okay for you, then ask him to swallow all 10 that he selected. He's like, only 1% of muscle testers are competent. I thought that was a funny post.
That is pretty funny, and he's got his own little Darwinian selection method at the end. Kill the guy off if he can't do it right. Yeah, in fact, it's funny. I figured that's one of the things I want to do a show on one day, because it is absolutely real. In fact, I have a number of muscle testers that I work with out here, and I don't believe any of them offhand. I mean, I've learned that, oh my God, they're incredibly accurate. Like when we see a number, like we did deuterium testing, deuterium level in the body testing with an electrodermal machine, like an Avatar, Skio, Zyto, one of these, USB software driven things. It's not a guy pushing your arm down, but it is doing the same kind of energies, but at a quantum level. And this is all based on research from the 40s. So none of this is new, right? The electrodermal goes back to Reinhard Voll of the 40s. He knew how to measure the meridians, and he could tell if there was inflammation and all this. And nowadays we can see everything. But we were getting numbers for deuterium tests, and then the actual lab test that I would send off for a deuterium test would come back, and it would be exactly the number to the decimal point. So after about a year and a half of having literally these different groups that have their own methods that I keep going to literally check each other and say, are we seeing the same thing? They were like, I've found a group that's allowing me to develop the programs that I'm developing, because they are incredibly accurate. So again, yeah, how do you know if your guy's accurate? It's a tough thing. And for a year and a half, I kept paying for the expensive labs. I kept paying because I didn't trust, I didn't believe, and everything was spot on. If they saw something here with some version of the energetic testing, and we submitted a lab, it matched every time to the number, to the PSA digit, to the whatever. And eventually it was like, do I really need to keep paying for lab tests when I now have this accuracy? And again, it's just a matter of getting yourself comfortable, but whether, you give them 10 pills of arsenic or whatever, I think we do have to poke the bear. We do have to test for each of us until we're confident. We know that we're with somebody that's legitimately developed that. And of course, we can develop it ourselves. There's a million YouTube videos on how you can do it yourself, and start training there. And it won't be overnight, but it'll be a skill we can all use. And then you don't have to pay somebody else for it. You can pick out your own vitamins and your own supplements. and tell if your dosage is the same as what somebody says it was, once you muscle test it for yourself. So I'm a big fan of that stuff. And I know it's not yet in the mainstream, but if you're trying to get over Lyme, if you're trying to get over a complex illness, if you don't have that on board, I'd say it can take 5 to 10 times as long, if ever, to get through it, because it's so complex. It was designed to be complex. It's on the record that they made it complex. I mean, so you have to have, we have to use the tools. We have to get over our own belief systems and start looking at what we can actually back with evidence. And you find that we have a lot more on our side than we thought.
That's awesome. That's really good stuff.
And I've definitely encountered the bad muscle testers.
Yeah, me too, for sure. How careful do we need to be when we're in an area that has ticks? Does a tick bite equal Lyme? You kind of said no earlier, right? It's not. I mean, it is, but it's not deer. So usually.
Well, what I was saying, so basically, if you get any bug bite, you're going to have problems. And what we found is there's virtually no safe creature that bites you. So this is one of those, it's like a PSA for the world we live in. It's not intended to be dramatic. This isn't intended to be fear-based. This is like, look, as much as it's within your control not to live in a house that has any traces of mold in it, it is in your best interest, as much as it's within your control, not to be eaten by bugs, because there aren't safe mosquitoes anymore. There aren't safe, in the whole arachnid family, but if it's a tick, absolutely. If you get bit by a tick, I don't even know if there are safe ticks at all left in the world. Like, they all have been loaded up. They all have propagated. There might be some remote part of the country or the world that, still has whatever. But at the same time, you can have 5 people that all get bit by ticks that are camping, and one guy gets symptoms and is debilitated 30 days later, and everyone else seems to move on with life and not be affected. So what is that? Well, that is a couple of factors. That is that somebody's immune system is working. They can actually handle the incoming threat. If you live in mold and then you get bitten by a bug, your immune system was turned off by the mold, you're going to be the guy in the group that goes down, like more likely to be. So it really is, again, it's all about being aware of all these layers and taking them all out. So if you're bitten by a tick, almost definitely he's going to transfer some horrible things. And it's just a matter of, is your immune system competent enough in that moment, or is it too toxified to notice it and address it?
That was awesome. I haven't traveled much, but I went on a family vacation down to the tip of Baja, Mexico when I was little, and I got eaten up by sand fleas. And I remember getting back from like that week trip and going to school, and just my whole abdomen, my whole stomach just had all these little red bumps on it. I mean, they were huge. And yeah, sand
Right.
fleas. I mean, I was like, hopefully they didn't transmit anything, but they're carriers of a lot of things, right? Parasites, viruses, bacteria.
Well, again, they admitted in the book that there was virtually no creature they left unscathed. They you know what I mean? They primed. I'm sure there's stuff we don't know about that they primed too. But in this day and age, I relate to, again, like I said, every bug bite can be a problem, but we had to peel off the layers anyway. And if we can get our immune systems working, and if we know the right tools, then those kind of happenstances where we get the mosquito bites, where we get the little, the flea bites, and the things on our dogs move over to us, and the things on our cats move over to us, because we weren't living with those animals before World War II. That's a new thing. That our immune systems, if they're healthy, they can actually handle that and generate a response. But I don't believe there's much of anything left that's safe in regards to that. So we have to make ourselves stronger.
Mosquitoes are one of the, I don't hate many things, but I hate mosquitoes. If I had a button where I could just, make them all extinct, I would. But it's like, have you seen those iPhone apps with like the frequency, or you could buy like a little device that supposedly emits a frequency that repels? I feel like we were talking about like free energy stuff before we started recording. And I feel like that's one of the suppressed technologies. I'm sure it exists, this little device that makes this little frequency bubble where it repels all ticks, all mosquitoes, right? All, little pests. There has to
That'd be
be.
great. That'd be a really great, especially if it was in a frequency range that wasn't audible or harmful to humans. Then yeah, that'd be a great. There's so much smart stuff that's out there when you look between the cracks.
Mhm.
It's not going to get promoted on Facebook. It's not going to be, you're not going to get spam emails about it. But if you look deeply enough, you're going to find those incredible gems out there. And with my series, I'm sure like yourself, that's how you're hearing about it is you have a show so people know like, hey, I found this incredible thing, and they send it in, and then I can vet it myself and take a look. And yeah, I don't know about that one, but if you find out more, let me know.
Yeah, yeah. Top foods for fighting Lyme and which foods feed it. I would imagine processed foods and garbage foods feed it, right?
Yeah, that's the good news is that a lot of the foods that we already sort of know are detrimental to our health are the ones that feed the parasites, and the parasite, basically Lyme, and when we think of the primary Lyme culprit, it's again is that Borrelia burgdorferi spirochete is what's considered the Lyme disease. Let's not look at the thousands of co-infections, but again, that spirochete and all of his little friends that come along, they really feed on the sugars. They feed on anything that turns into sugar in your body. They're even finding that the drug antabuse, disulfiram, is really, really good at getting rid of primary Lyme and Babesia, and it's working on that alcohol pathway because that's you did something about that, and they don't fully understand why it works, but it's incredibly, for the people it works for, it works incredibly well. Again, my focus, just for the people listening and looking for stuff, it's not about the bugs. If you are treating the bugs and thinking you're going to get somewhere, you're not going to get anywhere. It's about peeling off all the layers, starting with parasites, because they're larger and the parasites hold all the other stuff in them. It's getting rid of the metals out of the body, making sure your environment's clean, making sure your food's clean. But yeah, the short answer is yes. Most of the processed foods, most of the stuff that most people are becoming more educated in not eating, those tend to be the fuels for them. And then it gets really tricky because most people think they have Lyme, but they really have Lyme but a lot of mold exposure, in which case the protein source you eat now matters quite significantly. So now you're on an opposite path to like the Gerson plan, or these that are talking about getting rid of, really dealing with getting the animal products out of the body. And you have to eat the meats. Like you literally have to eat the meats. That's the way you would get the food. So you have to sort of know what you have going on, and then you can tune it. But yeah, so I don't know if I'm
That's
supposed to have shorter answers for these, but it's I find that the shorter answers leave out a lot of detail. So
No,
I
it's
hope it's okay.
great. It's perfect. Yeah, I appreciate all the explanations. Let's see. Can you sexually transmit Lyme?
So there are a number of species of, again, if we're just going by whoever's asking the question and they're just going by that Lyme is just this one spirochete, because again, can you transmit parasites? Yes, you can sneeze and you can sneeze out a pinworm egg. You know what I mean? You can transmit a parasite with a sneeze. You can transmit Babesia, you can transmit Bartonella, you can transmit some of these things. I mean, they even talk about mold. Like if you have moldy shoes, you treat yourself, but you had a foot fungus and you didn't throw out your shoes, you can reinfect yourself from the shoes from the mold. So is Lyme, if the question is it just the spirochete that transmits? If that's all they're asking about, then what I would say is that there are a number of different species of spirochete that we're aware of. And there are at least 2 or 3 of those, the genus of spirochete that is been documented as transmittable.
Interesting. Okay. Is it possible to actually heal from chronic Lyme, or does it just go dormant? Like, I guess I had a few questions too. Like, does everyone just always have it at a small level?
Yeah, it's It really, yes, the bottom line is, when I think of that question, the way I would say it is, can you live a fully healthy, normal life once you've been impacted directly by these critters and creatures and all this stuff? The answer is yeah. I mean, when you look at how the body breaks down, right? The first thing that happens when you've got some kind of assault on your body is your regenerative systems go down. So this is like hair growth. This is hair color. So those people that have like the Gandalf white hair and they're like 30 years old, or the balding or whatever people call aging, like whatever people call aging, I call symptoms. Again, if you do your research and you go very deep in the literature and you're not just, caught in the fix of today's numbers, you find that once again, we've been kind of fooled about a lot of things. And the human body is should be able to live a lot longer than it is, like 2, 3, 4 times as long. And, you can listen to all the deuterium research on that, which I'm sure you've done. And you get into like how long the human body can live if you just deal with those heavy hydrogen atoms in the body. And go back in time to when there's 15 part per million less hydrogen in the atmosphere in the world. So, when I look at, can you unload the layers and then live a normal life? Yes. But you will, for the rest of, everyone should, whether you have symptoms now or not, if you want to live that normal, healthy life, you have to pay attention to those layers for the rest of your life, right? Because they're not going to start, it's not tomorrow. They're not going to get a petition and then change a century of weather modification, right? Like those chemicals always need to be dealt with. Like those chemicals are constantly coming in and we need to be dealing with, the best and easiest strategies for counteracting them. The bugs are always going to bite us. So we need to be present to the best tools for unloading that and the healthiest immune system for detecting and fighting it off. So, yeah, I mean, if you're sick, the bottom line is you can absolutely get well. If you are, and if you're well, you have to do the same stuff that the guy that's sick will have to do if you want to have a beautiful long life and keep your brain functional and be able to think and be a person for the rest of your life. So
that's awesome. Thoughts on that? No, that's good. I like your approach. It's not like one, just like it's the spirochete, let's wipe it out. I have a lot of people that follow my work that are all about parasites and just like really focused on those as like the root cause of all disease. And I used to use the Terminator 2, like Hulda Clark zapper. I didn't feel anything from it for like a year, nothing.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was effective. I don't think it works, but micropulsing and real electromedicine with a device that actually works, I've had success with. And I think electromedicine's better than herbs. Like I used to be all about wormwood combination and using that supplement. And now I think tobacco is the premier natural anti-parasitic that I personally utilize. I used to grow it, and I will actually on this property. And that's been used as a dewormer for pigs in the Farmer's Almanac. And I'm not condoning smoking, but I mean, I've made a paste out of it. I think hop is really popular right now. I don't know if I'd ever do that, but tobacco is
incredible. Nicotine is
amazing.
incredible. Yeah, we used to live above a scientist from Anschutz Medical University here in Denver. That was his whole career, is studying. So that's nicotine's great, and of course, there's lots of ways to put it in the body.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think a tobacco enema can like kill you, and so that's probably. I mean, I haven't done an enema in a year, but that's probably something to stay away from.
I'm trying to imagine that's literally blowing smoke up your ass. Right?
People do like a tobacco tea, and
I'm sure. Yeah.
But you could do it. Yeah.
Joke.
I made a paste called Ambil, which I guess is a South America thing, which is. I would do cacao and honey, and it's a traditional little paste that would apparently put around their neck in like a little container, and they would just eat it throughout the day, and it would increase their visual acuity for hunting and different things, and it's pretty cool.
Sounds like microdosing psilocybin too.
Right, that's really big right now. Yeah. What's your thoughts on bee venom therapy versus RIFE versus herbal protocol? Do it all, right?
Well, again, if you have so all of these things are very valid. So bee venom, if they're, in my estimation, from my experience, if once you have a lot of complex layers going on, there's probably not one size fits all solution. There's not like whatever worked for one guy is not going to work. Like I said, I'm treating my whole family, and we all, each one of us, with the same, the same genetics to some degree, whatever degree we have the same genetics and all this, we have very different approaches that are needed for each. But it's really just the sequencing might be slightly different, and the products and the tools might be different. Okay, so having said that, bee venom therapy is incredible. It is one of the closer all-in-one therapies that are out there. Like if you were just to ignore everything else I had just said, and there were a couple, and I think there are a couple of things that can get you well, that can absolutely get you well. Maybe even one or two therapies that can put you back on your feet, depending on if they're available in your area. Bee venom therapy would be one of them. However, again, it's not necessarily decontaminating the glyphosate. It's not taking the aluminum out of your brain. It's not changing the quality of food you're putting in your body. But those things can have a really great, again, I go back to those things are all legitimate therapies. Every one of those that you just mentioned are great possible potential therapies. Many of them I've employed personally, but it has to do with the sequencing, and that's where you get into the bioresonance, the muscle testing systems, something that can help determine what you need in the order in which those tools can be put in.
I love it. Yeah, I think I've said it before on my show, but one time I was in the parking lot of Sprouts and I felt something on my neck, and then I went through the doors, and I kind of went like this on my neck, and there's a bee that fell off on the ground, and it literally stung me pretty close to my ear and my neck. And I just got so high, I felt like I drank like 5 espressos with no crash for the entire day. I felt incredible. That was my first introduction to bee venom therapy. And now I wish, I mean, if I could buy like little syringe, I know it's probably not the most natural way to do it, but I was
No,
trying to find companies.
that's how Klinghardt does it.
Okay, that's hard to
Yeah,
get.
so injecting it is one of the most effective ways to do it. That's how he likes doing it. It's the source of it matters a lot, and he's got a guy up in Canada he really likes. It's difficult to find a good source, but yeah, injection is actually that's the most potent way to do it.
Yeah.
Did we address everything he asked about V venom therapy and what else did he?
Yeah, RIFE. And I wanted to ask you, like, you got me
RIFE.
actually onto the sentient light because I was using the rip-off product, which I don't even want to name and put energy into that, but I was using I was using the rip-off product that stole from was it Larry Langdon, who's a really nice guy. I've spoken with him on the phone, who made the product that's a lot cheaper, it's a lot better, it's a lot more open source, called Sentient Light. And I mainly just keep that.
The element coil by Sentient Light. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good first aid, right? I mean, for Lyme, that's incredible.
So when people say RIFE, we could make this its own show, because if anything, what I've learned is I was actually the first to the internet with talking about, that sounded like a brag, that one, but I was the first one talking about the coils, and they were the earliest solution for the Lyme itself, right? Going back to 1980 and Doug McLean. That's why it's called the Doug coil. All the today's coils are derivative of the Doug coil. And thank God what Larry and those guys have made are way better today, because you don't have to set a little, bunch of toggle switches for every frequency. You can have it do thousands of frequencies and different waveforms, all kinds of great stuff now that the coils handle. But the question is, when somebody says RIFE in a lot of people's minds is like a class of instruments, a class of frequency related instruments. So RIFE machine is different from a Doug coil, which is different from a frequency specific microcurrent FSM device, which is different from the Bob Beck, like what Soda's manufacturing with the Bob Beck pulsars and this kind of stuff, which is different, you can keep going. There's quite a realm of what these devices, of these electromagnetic frequency range devices. And of course, Hulda Clark would be in there too. And they all serve a different purpose. So this is what we didn't know going in. So, okay, when you look historically, RIFE was treating virtually every disease of his time in the 1920s with one RIFE machine. He could set the dial. he was using plasma. There was light involved in the transmission of energy, because one of the best tools I just forgot in that frequency medicine would be cold laser therapy. So these are all the spectrum of devices, right? So a RIFE device, we've actually found that a genuine RIFE device, meaning a device with plasma tubes, with maybe cylinders that you hold in your hand, or metal pads that you step on, that are going to transmit frequencies and vibrations into your body in a proximal way, right? Because you're holding on to the device. They're not going to treat you from 5 feet away like the coil will. You are not getting the same treatment as a coil. You're not, which is not delivering even the same frequencies in each machine, is a different purpose. So this is something I've never heard anyone really talk about. I'm sure there's somebody out here that knows this. I haven't found them yet. And so we've had to really distinguish what are the different tools, what are they used for. So here's what we found. So when it comes to RIFE machines, they do serve a purpose, especially without the plasma tubes. They serve a lot less of a purpose. That plasma aspect, of the RIFE machine is key to the delivery, the potency of those frequencies. Now, we do see that doing something for the infection, but we see the RIFE mostly where RIFE came up, like an actual plasma RIFE machine came up in our toolkit, was around some aspects of mold and some aspects of co-infection. When we look at what the coils are best for, the coils are terrible for getting rid of the creatures. Like, we have not, the frequency range is low, and it's producing this magnetic field, a big toroidal magnetic field like the one around our bodies and the one around Earth. This is a very important aspect of it. So the coil is the ultimate healing device. It's the ultimate delivery system so when the bugs crawl into your body, the first thing that they do, and I include parasites and every other type of creature, plus the toxicities, they do the same thing. They turn off these enzymes. I talked about this on Justin's show. The name is KPU, or Crypto pylori. And any alcoholic that's ever been has had Crypto pylori. Any schizophrenic that's ever existed has had Crypto pylori. They've literally had an infection that changed their brain chemistry that created these different necessities, or these different qualities to their personality. The coil is incredible at resetting those enzyme pathways. It's called the heme pathway, as in your blood, hemoglobin. So those enzymes, like the coil, is amazing for restoring basic function to the immune system and the body, and restoring those aspects. We've found it useful on some molds, and we very rarely use it on infection. Cold laser is literally, there is nothing else like it. You point it at the colonies of infection and they melt, and you're in whatever healing needs to happen where they were, just completely heals. But you wouldn't use that for KPU. You wouldn't use that the same way that, again, so it would be used very differently. The FSM, which is now microcurrent, and it's using pads, if you haven't, I was going to bring it over here and I didn't, but anyway, it's using electrical pads. That is, like, in my estimation, the best replacement for surgery, or the best alternative to surgery you can have. It is using the same frequencies. So as you can see, the point is not to go too much into depth on each one, but to show you, like, the coil heals the body. The laser treats the infection. The FSM rebuilds the organs. You might use the RIFE for some mold. You might use the coil for some mold. But you're going to use, you know what I mean? So these all play a very different role in the aspects of getting well and treating Lyme. So that's what we're seeing.
That's awesome. Have you heard of like Power Medic lasers? I know there's probably smaller brands, but that's like the only cold laser I've heard of.
I don't know Power Medic. No, I don't know.
I've seen that at like different conferences I've been to, like people putting these wands up to different tissues. But I'm sure there's like a small Sota-like company that's like really, really cheap and affordable.
Well, interestingly, so I don't know if you're aware of this. Have you gotten much into the Spooky 2 system?
I was using that years ago. I think I was using that like 6 or 7 years ago, and I was using the remote one. And I think I put the girl I was dating at the time, her fingernail in there. And that was freaky because that was a really new relationship. She thought I was nuts. And then my whole family's fingernail in there.
Hey, good news. You are nuts. Me
right?
too, though.
When we broke up, I took it out, of course. Yeah, not to be weird, but yeah, fingernail in the what is it? The tape, like the paper tape, and I would put it in the. And I think they had like a north and a south. One was for like healing, one was for killing. But I had some weird experiences with that. Like my mom, my whole family was at the mall, and my mom looks at me and she's like, "Do you hear that?" And she like made the noise. I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, that's what I'm hearing in the center of my head. And we were hearing the same frequency at the mall. We were like 30 minutes from the house or something. I was like, that's weird.
Well, you were way ahead of the curve on the spooky then. Holy cow. But they have got their act together these days.
Yeah.
And they are making incredibly inexpensive products. I mean, basically, they're almost the first company making. Like there's software that gets shared like freeware, and they're literally like the first company practically making free hardware. But they do, they sell their stuff now, and they've gotten their software really dialed in. But they sell. It's called the Generator X. Is that what you maybe used with the?
I think it was an older one.
Yeah, that's right. The Generator X. That's right. That's a brand new one. Actually, you're right. It's about a couple
Correct.
years old, I think.
I'll look that
Well,
up.
the
Huh.
the Generator X, they sell you a $20 cold sinus laser.
Wow.
So it literally comes as little capsules is a $20 cold laser.
Hmm.
Now, it doesn't will it do the same thing as a $10,000 laser like the Erconia laser, the one you're talking about? No, it's not going to get that deep in the body. It's not that high powered. It's not quite that cohesive, but it's for a cold laser. It'll treat your sinuses. It'll treat the prefrontal cortex.
Wow.
So it'll do all of that stuff. And they also sell the spooky cold wrist laser, which you put it on and it literally backs right up against your radial and ulnar pulse. It's impressive. This is again a $28 wrist laser and a $20 nose laser. So there are really inexpensive things out there, and they work. We use the spooky stuff for a lot of things. If we have to go deeper into the body, you have to get one of these clinical lasers. And again, I'll just put it out there that there are people watching your show and they've come across some other brands that do some of these things that are maybe less money than 10 or 15 grand, because those lasers used to cost like 4 or 5, and now they're 10 to 15 grand
Wow.
when you buy like a clinical grade.
Interesting.
But if people
Have,
know other sources out there, I love learning about this stuff and finding other products.
have you used the remote aspect of the spooky? Because that was what was cool to me. Like it works 24/7. You don't have to be strapped to anything. I really liked that
Right.
feature.
The my partner, my medical partner that I build a lot of the stuff that we're building, she uses it all the time. She really, really loves the remote. I have not ventured into that personally, but she loves it and she's getting results. So I take her at her word that she's seeing incredible stuff. And if you know enough about quantum physics and non-locality these things actually all make sense, and they have lots and lots of scientific data why they would work, even though they sound really bizarre that you could treat somebody remotely without cables from across the world. But again, when I studied radiesthesia at the Vesica Institute, our professor there, literally, he was a Navy trainer in the 80s. And he was telling us, so he used to get classified, Marine trainer. He's in the Marines. And he used to, his title was like post nuclear and chemical warfare training. And he was telling us about classified documents that they were getting in the 70s that showed that the government had a way of tracking and tracing everybody on vibrational frequency. Like you didn't have to be chipped. You didn't have to have your iPhone on you. Like these are the things that now the spooky and some of these other things are doing. And people are like, that can't possibly be working, except that the government knew about this technology, these kind of technologies so much longer ago, and they have other unfortunate designs for those. But we need to
Yeah,
catch up. We need to be open-minded and catch up, because these things that we think are junk that we're being told might be crazy or junky or whatever are being used against us in other horrible ways. So we might as well use them to our advantage.
yeah. Recently, I posted the 23andMe just because I find like just my heritage and ancestry interesting. And so someone messaged me. They're like, Google owns 23andMe, right? I'm like, they already have a clone of me walking around on Mars, I'm sure, in some slave colony.
Right.
That's like, I'm not going to worry about some little 23andMe test. They already have it all.
It is one of those things. It is one of those. That's one of those. Yeah. Are they? You know, I just don't want to make myself an easy target. But if of course if there's ways to use, so Bob Miller would be where I would go for genetic testing, because you're right. They took a piece of our blood when we were born. Anyone born after 1970, they pricked your toe in the hospital and they have it on file. And that's exactly what you would use to remote treat somebody, as you were just saying. The vibration of you is contained in your fingernail clipping, in a strand of your hair, in your blood, of course. Your blood's a very powerful. It's called these would actually be called a witness. It's a way of locating you. So absolutely, did they already get it? Yeah. But do we need to make it any easier for them? I hope not.
This is a good question. I think a lot of people ask this about Lyme testing. What's the latest on Lyme disease testing? Is it accurate? What test do you recommend? Stuff like that.
Almost everybody that I, there's really a rising tide. I listen to, there's almost nobody I won't listen to, and then I'll put it in the pipe and smoke it, as they would say, and see what kind of, if anything, works from that. Some of the crazy guys have the great stuff, and sometimes it's all wrong and wacky. But when it comes to all of the best practitioners out there that are getting great results with their Lyme people, they are not relying heavily on clinical lab tests anymore. So to straight up answer the question, so I'm not going to dissuade the answer. Let me just tell you the answer and then we'll go into some more detail. But the one of the premier kind of tests that's rising, so IGeneX is one of the big Lyme tests out there, the lab tests. And again, they're looking in your blood for the spirochete, for the DNA of the spirochete, which they sometimes find, or they sometimes find a little bit of it. And then you don't know, is that really an answer? Or sometimes they find a lot of it. And then you're like, okay, that's pretty much an answer. So they're considered one of the premier. And then, there's the DNA connections with an X, connections. They're a Colorado-based urine lab test. And Lyme love to come out of your body in your urine. So if you do this test correctly, so if you stand in front of red lights, which drive them crazy and move them out of, especially on your palms and some of the places they like to reside, you can easily drive them out, or you just do a walk or a good workout or whatever. And then you collect urine for the day and send this in. It's going to light up like a Christmas tree, and it's going to be a lot less expensive than a $1,200 comprehensive IGeneX test or whatever. It's going to be like, in the neighborhood of $350, $400. So those are some of the lab tests that are, there's a lot of other stuff out there. Most of the other, like the Western blot is incredibly inaccurate. And, I was teeming, like every lab test I took just showed right. It was like, no unequivocally, like CDC levels, Xiren, you have Lyme at CDC levels. When I got back my IGeneX test. So it was never a question. Did I have it? Did I have a lot of it? That was easy to detect. Of course, it was forcing my doctor to submit the correct lab analysis. Okay, so we got all that out of the way. So if you're a super Western guy and you don't want to, risk blowing your mind up with opening it a little, then that's where you want to start. Is those things are going to tell you, with some reliability if you have it. Now, here's what we're finding. The deeper you treat the person, like we started treating and getting rid of Lyme, we got rid of Lyme primary. Lyme primary, consider that like the easy to find Lyme. That's not the stuff that has spun and burrowed into the middle of your bone. That's the stuff that's not in your connective tissue. It is the stuff that's going to easily come out from your blood test and whatnot. That Lyme can be, there's a million ways to treat it. So we treated that Lyme. We knew there was Lyme secondary. I started submitting IGeneX tests and I started submitting the DNA connection urine analysis. And look, I was Lyme free, except that we're still seeing it on every other energetic test there was. So those tests have a huge limitation. The way I look at it, the way what we're seeing because just again, going back to the bioresonance, if anyone wants to look up electrodermal or bioresonance, you're going to start finding stuff about Reinhard Voll. Again, I mentioned him earlier, from like the 40s and 50s, and him being able to scientifically and electronically measure what the Chinese were calling the meridian systems of the body. And he was finding not only were those ancient meridian systems drawn perfectly accurately, defying, logic, but he discovered a whole slew more that weren't there. So nowadays, what we can do is essentially like Star Trek. Like if you have an incredible bioresonance technician, somebody that can work that machine, that knows how to use it, that knows how to really get in there and look for stuff, they're gonna see through you like Star Trek. It's gonna be like that machine that just scans your body and sees everything. That's literally what's capable out there. And if you live in Britain, you've actually interacted with these machines. You probably went to your ER and they put you on one of these to narrow your diagnosis and then to give you the lab test to confirm. But now, I think of like it was a year and a half before I finally got somewhat on the right track with my IGeneX test, because my doctor's like, you don't have Lyme, you don't have Lyme, you don't have Lyme. I'm like, I think I have Lyme. Get the lab test back, it confirms it. Well, again, a 5-minute bioresonance scan would have saved me however many thousands of dollars in a year and a half or more of all that. So the Western tests that you want are the ones I've mentioned, but ultimately you want to be in the hands of capable muscle testing people. And most of the diagnosticians, like the best Lyme guys out there, and I put the guys I mentioned in that category. That's the Klinghardt, that's the Jay Davidson, that's the Todd Watts, that's these guys that are on the forefront. In a lot of ways, they're looking at clinical stuff. Joe Christa, like, how are you going to test for mold and know that mold is your big problem versus the 8 million layers that I've just mentioned that might be causing your problem? Well, you got to narrow it down by a clinical definition. You got to say, do you have anxiety? Well, guess what? If you have anxiety, you have mold. That is, of the thousands and thousands of symptoms that are across the whole board for mold, just mold and mycotoxins. If you have anxiety, that is not a natural human condition. This is something that Gurdjieff and the mystery schools told us about. The guys that really have documented human history, kept that history alive, not the bunk one that we learn about in our schools and stuff. Maybe I'm blowing too many minds with this right now, but those, if you study enough, you learn that there's a lot more to the story. And these guys had told us that anxiety, as humans evolved on Earth, as we were here longer and longer, those aspects of anxiety crept in to the human system. And now what I see is that's the layers that we're talking about, and that's the mold. So again, it's a clinical diagnosis. It's pretty easy to, if you're in the right hands, the hands of somebody that knows anything, any of those guys I mentioned or any millions of others, doctors out there, they're going to look when they might not even bother with a lab test anymore, because we know what, for instance, Babesia looks like versus Bartonella. We know what the symptoms of, the Lyme spirochete bearing your primary issue are versus the mold that might be in your, so all these things are, you can pretty much rule them out or rule them in with with looking at symptomology.
That was amazing. Yeah, I really appreciate all that info. And my ears perked up when you talked about red light, because I've been studying light therapy pretty hardcore for the last 4 years. And, experimenting with cold baths at noonday sun. And I did the whole sun worshiping heliotherapy thing. I think it took a little too far, especially now with my research on lipofuscin and omega-3s and iron complexing, and how cold therapy and UV light makes it worse. So I was kind of just spreading this, this accumulation of lipofuscin throughout my body. But I have so many red lights around, and I have a little light bed I lie in, and red light panels, and
that's my red rush right there behind us.
That's awesome. Yeah. So Lyme doesn't like red light. That makes sense, because I designed a protocol called the CLF protocol. It stands for calcification, lipofuscin, fibrosis. And my basic idea for balancing the entire body is just taking out these accumulations so that oxygen can get to the tissue. And then we have bioavailable copper to utilize the oxygen, which is required. And iron can't be there because that stops the utilization of oxygen in excess amounts.
Right.
But red light therapy is just incredible, because for everyone that's iron overloaded from acid rain and iron fortification after World War II, and it really kickstarts that cytochrome C oxidase in the third cytochrome to make ATP. And if you have energy, I mean, your tissues, your immune system everything functions with more energy, right? It functions
Yeah.
better. So,
Yeah. Well, it's literally where the best doctors now start, with mitochondrial energy, just like you're talking about.
I
And
love it.
if we get to it, I'll talk about one of the game changers I found, because if you're really sick, you should do these things, but they might not get you anywhere. They might not seem to get you very far, but there are a couple things that are out there that are miraculous, that are still available for people. They haven't been shut down yet.
That's awesome. That's kind of a good segue in this one. Someone asked about your thoughts on serrapeptase, which is that systemic enzyme. I actually sell that. I have a systemic enzyme blend. I don't mean to make it a sales pitch, but it's like nattokinase and serrapeptase. But the biofilm aspect is huge, right? And enzymes, I think oregano. There's a lot of things you can do to break down those biofilms and just scar tissue, right?
Yeah. So again, I wish there were blanket answers I could give, because those things are typically really, really good, and most of us can benefit from them. But again, let's say you have a little bit of mold, then some of those different products, they might have, they might have some different enzymes in them that are actually grown in a fermented state or such.
Mm-hmm.
And then that particular version of it actually makes you a little worse, which again, if you kind of see the whole universe the way I'm describing, it actually starts to narrow down your particular, the source of your symptomology. Because you go, oh, I'm taking these serrapeptase enzymes, or I'm taking this particular, the mast zymes, some of these different ones. And if they have a reaction in you, again, if hopefully you have a muscle tester that can rule that out, so you're not getting hurt by it. But it might not be the right time if you have some mold going on or some other aspect of it. So, but yeah, all these are very useful in general, for sure.
I like that. Yeah, that's awesome. Why does everyone with Lyme end up doing carnivore diets?
Probably because most people that think they have really bad Lyme have really, really bad mold exposure.
Wow.
And if you have mold exposure, like I mentioned earlier, then meat is about the only, meat is the preferred source of protein. Like, you literally have to go to meat to get, for most of us that have a mold issue, that might choose other dietary reasons for moralistic aspects or whatnot. Like, we've confronted the fact that you actually have to use animal products in those cases. So if there's mold involved, and most people that think they have really bad Lyme, that nothing gets them better, they've blown up all the Lyme and taken antibiotics for years, or shit, maybe they've used cold laser and they've done it right. But again, that's just one of a billion layers, and you're still living in mold. You're not really entitled to have any symptoms go away because you haven't gotten to the main issue. So yeah, so I think that's a big piece of it, is that I wasn't aware that was a statistic anyone was keeping track of, that everyone with Lyme is eating meat. But again, in my mind, that's how I would connect the dots. I would say, if people have whatever instincts they have left that are functional, then they have mold exposure, they're probably being drawn in a positive way to animal products.
I love it. Have you heard of supportive oligonucleotide therapy? I've never heard of that.
I have not, unless there's some other name for it, or unless I've forgotten about it, but I certainly couldn't speak about it.
I know the oligodendrocytes are responsible for the myelin sheath, so it sounds like a nerve regeneration kind of a therapy thing. Yeah, I'm not sure. Let me see. Is Lyme caused by Epstein Barr virus? And I think that was another question too.
Anthony Williams.
Right? Yep, that's what celery juice. It's a cure for everything.
Everybody has Lyme, everybody has Epstein Barr. And again, when I say Lyme, I mean, in most of the ways, I mean the higher source, but for right now, I'm talking about the Lyme spirochete. But everybody has the spirochete in their body. Everybody has Epstein Barr in their body. But whether or not it's debilitating, certainly Epstein Barr is not the only thing responsible. Just like the Lyme spirochete is not the only thing responsible. Just like mold is not the only thing responsible. Just like KPU is not the only thing. Just like mast cell is not, you know what I mean? So retrovirus is not the only, blah, blah, blah. We all have all of it. And the only reason I was interrupted in my 30s from life, and most people that maybe are in their 30s haven't been interrupted, or they're in their 40s or 50s and they haven't yet been interrupted, is because they're just building up their own layers at a different pace and they've had different exposures. I lived in mold for 10 years and it activated it. Do you have to deal with the Epstein Barr? Absolutely. Somewhere in that plan, you definitely have to deal with that. But parasites make you fatigued as well. Retrovirus is the key thing. Like, man, all those doctors that were murdered for talking about that thing, and Judy Mikovits, sorry, I've always pronounced her name wrong, but it's Mikovits is correct. She's one of my heroes. These are my heroes. These kind of people, put in jail for doing the research on this with no stated purpose, just sent to jail because you're looking at But retrovirus, she found, was in 100%, like basically in every case that had to do with some kind of chronic fatigue element, there was a retrovirus. She's not even looking at Epstein Barr. So the point is Epstein Barr there? Yes. Is it the whole picture? Not even close. So Anthony Williams, I don't know if he's a blessing or a curse, but I've probably heard that thing a million times. Just take care of your Epstein Barr and your mono. Well, guess what? Everybody's got Epstein Barr. Most of it is dormant. 2 hours of a phone call, cumulatively, 2 hours in the field of your phone is enough to activate Epstein Barr, and now you're fatigued. This, like I said, EMF is the just add water to all these problems. It's where they show the mold that's isolated in a Faraday cage and the mold that is exposed to electrosmog. This mold goes haywire. This mold grows by 600% is the number that Klinghardt and his group that did these tests are talking about. These are extraordinary aspects that the bugs are reacting to this EMF field. So, Anthony Williams didn't say anything about that either. But anyway, so I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but it's an aspect.
That's cool. Yeah, and I like what you said about EMFs. Like with the iPhone, a really good strategy I found is going to settings, privacy, and then just turning off location services. Because with the iPhone, like I have the newest one, there's multiple different antennas in there. And just if you're not using your GPS, if you're going to the store and you know which turns to take and you're not going to get lost, there's no reason to keep on location services. And I feel a definite reduction in EMF, like burning in my hand. I don't get burning in my hand if that location service is, and when it's on because that little arrow will be in the top left of your phone on the main screen there. So
yeah, so that was one of the design when they were designing phones initially, cell phones initially. That was a huge engineering hurdle, was how do we stuff these 4 powerful antennas into this little box and not have them interfere with each other, right? Well, so those 4 antennas, iPhone in particular, is making it very difficult to turn off. It used to be you'd hit airplane mode and it would just turn them all off, including whatever else, but the GPS is actually a magnetic field. So you won't pick it up with your EMF meter, but you will pick it up with your Gauss meter, with your magnetic field meter. The other 3 antennas are all radio frequency based, entirely radio frequency based. And all 4 are toxic and horrible and whatever. But if you can feel for you the magnetic fields, then that means you've been sensitized to them. My guess is you've probably been living on some pretty harrowing earth grids and have done pretty good with it overall. But the sensitivity is, again, these are like this tells me, from what you're describing, I can tell some of the things that you need to work on down the road for what it's worth. Like these, the metals and the deuterium restructuring our cells as little antennas so that we receive those things. The fact that you become sensitive to the magnetic fields tells part of the story. But you have to turn off, like if you hit airplane mode on a modern iPhone, if you're keeping your iPhone updated, which I try not to, but they sort of force you at times, like if you break your old one and you got to get a new one, you're screwed. You know what I mean? That operating system was locked into that hardware. You cannot just clone your old beautiful phone over and have that, ancient system that used to, you press one button and it turns it off. So I've gotten good like you have it going in there, turning off location service. That's never on for me. Like I only turn that on if I'm using the map. Mm-hmm. The Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi are never, ever on. I always turn those off. But again, those, even when you hit airplane mode now, those still stay on. You have to go in and independently turn off all the antennas. It only turns off the cellular antenna.
It's hard. Life is so complex now. It's hilarious. And I think some people are in such denial where they're like, just keep life simple. It's like, that's literally impossible to keep life simple. But I mean,
Yeah,
it's a nice.
I feel a lot like the fact that I went away for these 8 years, that I've had to learn all this, like at such a deep level and such a real level where it's clinically applicable to myself, my wife, my brother, my parents, all this stuff, my friends. Um, no one can, we were discussing, you and I had like an hour long pre-interview before, before the interview. Even we were familiar with each other from different posts and stuff, but it was really, we went down some rabbit holes talking there. And that was one of the things I addressed, was like the information that it took me to learn here. Like my goal is to put it in as simple of terms as possible while not leaving out the sophistication of the answers. But the truth is, you're exactly right. Like and I also consider that a personal life journey and mission for me. And that's why I'm so grateful to do shows like this while I can't invest, in all the time in the video editing of my own show, to be able to put some of these ideas out and put them on my channel that way too. But that, I feel, is like, this is just, it took me 8 years or more. I was learning about cancer stuff 15 years ago because I had 6 friends die of cancer starting when I was a 6-year-old best friend with a brain tumor. And, so I learned, I had to go through and learn all this stuff. And now you're right. It's a big, complex picture. In my mind, it's very simple, like, cause I've looked at it for so long. And so my goal is to try and transmit and be that source of information for people. And there's a lot of others out there too, but really try and, you know, I hope to someday actually be able to put a little online course together. There's one I'm doing for very close friends of mine. I want to grow old with people that have their brains and their minds and not cancers and dementias. So I'm personally taking, like, for free, taking a lot of my friends through, like, 1 month. We'll just start with where you'd start. I don't care if you think you have symptoms or you don't think you have symptoms. Like, you all have to get rid of parasites. Our pets are regularly dewormed. My mother-in-law remembers when that used to be part of school. You drink this horrible tasting stuff and you just, all this stuff would fall out of you. Well, that stuff never stopped climbing into us, but we stopped making it fall out. So
Yeah.
now we have to do that. And if you're sick, you have to do it a lot more gently and for a lot longer time, because it's built up to that point. So there's, again, it is complex, and but I do see that as sort of a big part of my mission. I was taken out of life where I had to study and learn and go through all these trainings, and now it's my job to put it into some kind of digestible. But you're right, it is. Once you understand that the world is not at all what we were told it was, right? Especially, I went to private schools as a kid. So you model, whether you went to private or public school, you model whatever you grew up with onto the world. So in some ways, the disadvantage I had was being half of my 8th grade graduating class in a school of 32 kids from preschool through 8th grade. Like, you're dealing with everybody's friends with everyone else. You can trust your elders. You can trust the guy with the badge, so to speak, right? But then you map that onto the rest of the world and you go, oh, I can trust the police officer. He's certainly working in my best interest. I can trust those politicians. Surely Obama's not lying to me. Surely, whatever president that's running for whatever isn't making these things up. And then you find out it's quite the opposite, right? Like, Obama extended the war to 7 theaters of war after winning the Nobel Peace Prize. It was like, you have to go through that heartbreak and realize the world is engineered very differently than we were told. And Catherine Fitz has it right. If you just come from the perspective that the real problem in the world today, it's the problem of the farmer and the chicken, right? That we were talking about beforehand. We'll just to spell it out, that the chicken wants to have its life. It wants to be fully expressed. It wants to find itself and its purpose and have self-expression and be healthy and healthful. And then you have the farmer who wants to harvest the chicken for financial resources to eat the chicken. And it also does not relate to the chicken as the same species. So now that farm, what's the farm? Well, the farm is the schoolhouse. The farm is the world we live in, right? And the farmers are mostly invisible. They're not the politicians we think. Like, it's not just that simple. There are people financing all of that. When they list, like, I laugh every time they're like, and the 500 richest people in Forbes magazine. I'm like, There's no Rothschild in there. Like a century ago, the Rothschilds were estimated to own in one family over half of the world's wealth. And now there's literally no idea, right? They've literally made themselves invisible because they're so far above the system, so far above the farm, as it were.
Yeah, 9/11, it took me 4 years after 9/11 to wake up. And I think this Jeffrey Epstein thing, that's a seed that was planted. And then people will wake up that for over the next 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years, if we have that,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. Like with the Jeffrey Epstein thing, at least it's a meme, and to some degree, we can't do much about it, so it's a distraction.
Mhm.
Ultimately, it's kind of a distraction.
Mhm.
But people, it's like if I think today, like if JFK had been assassinated today, the way he was back then, nobody would buy it. In the 50s, they didn't have that heartbreak yet. We had just moved in the Project Paperclip Nazis into all these positions of power. And as Professor Joseph Farrell has documented, they instantaneously, over the course of just a year and a half, like rebuilt the entire Nazi structure of command inside the American intelligence and deep state apparatus. And again, I'm not going by like the modern television
Mhm.
definition of deep state. I'm going by um, Professor Peter Dale Scott's definition of the deep state,
Mhm.
which are those much deeper forces that are inside the government that don't change out and this kind of stuff. So, uh, so anyway, we live in a very different world. Not to get too far off, but you're right. We have to start asking questions. And again, if the people that are sick, like what I like about the Lyme community is they've already been given up on by their doctors. Like they've already had their heart broken. They've been left behind by all their friends who aren't used to having, you find out very quickly that most of the people on earth are terrible at being around sick people. Like it just weirds them out or they don't want to do it. So,
Yeah.
even, me, and I thought I had this incredibly robust community. Like, God, if you just, if you're not calling them every day, they skedaddle. They don't care after a while. So
Yeah.
in that isolation, you're able to look with a very clean set of eyes. So when I talk to the Lyme community, I don't have to preface stuff about 9/11, or I don't have to preface these aspects that would be considered conspiratorial inside the mainstream, because they've already experienced it firsthand and they know that their doctor's not really got any idea how to help them because
Mhm.
they've been going for 8 or 10 or 20 or 30 years and getting nowhere and
Mhm.
finding no tools inside the mainstream. And the other tracks they don't understand because, again, there's never going to be an episode of Grey's Anatomy that takes place in an acupuncture clinic.
Yeah.
It's always going to be white lab coated MDs, right? And what do? White lab coated MDs. They have they don't have freedom of speech.
Mhm.
They don't suffer freedom of speech. They are literally bound to commercial speak, meaning every word out of their mouth is libel. And if they mention, for instance, a therapy that the FDA, which is considered the most captured agency in the government, the federal government, the FDA, right?
Wow.
And what captured means is just like how the former lawyer for Monsanto is now the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. Like that's what I mean. Like that interplay and revolving door between our government and this, the FDA and the corporations that it's supposed to police. And of
Mhm.
course, really what the FDA is it's making sure there's no competition. And that's why we're seeing the fire that comes on to SOTA, for instance, up in Canada by
Mhm.
Health Canada, because that's the FDA prompted. That's basically the FDA of Canada. And that's why we saw that beautiful cure for arthritis in the Midwest go away that I was talking about, CMO,
Mhm.
and that the senior citizen couple that was running that company out of Ohio this year. So anyhow, when we get into these things, I'm saying this all because not because I like to talk, but because I like to open people's minds, if only just a crack. I know there's probably a lot of people. In fact, if they watch your show, there's probably not too many people for whom this is news to. Am I correct in that? Like, if
Yeah.
they're
Oh, yeah.
following you, they're off of they're off the mainstream boat to some degree.
I
It's my
think I think
guess.
I think they're gonna love it. I like how we're going a little bit off track here because I think I mean, it's all connected. It's not really off track, and
Well, I don't.
I,
It sounds off track, but it's not, because if you don't get open minded, chances are you're not going to get well. If you don't
yeah.
realize, like the doctors that aren't addressing that there are actually chemicals being dumped in the sky, that those trails are not only real, but have a century history, documentable, easily findable history that, of course, your meteorologist isn't talking about, right? So, well, if the meteorologist isn't talking about on ABC News, then surely it can't be real. No, but if you look into these things, they are real. If you don't realize that that's a component of your health, if you don't realize, fortunately, we now get to say that because of Chris Newby's book, at least most of the world got to see the story that that our own government paid for the manufacturing of what most of us are suffering from, those layers that we're talking about. These are, we live in a world where the conspiracies have been confirmed. A lot of the big ones have been confirmed. And we just don't have the time to really look into them. And again, that's the gift that I've had of being really hit by this disease, was I had to take time off. I had to go deep. And then in that deepness, you find that the answers are way more powerful than you thought. And they're way more interesting. And life is way more magical and fantastical than we were told.
I love it. And I want to put this in here too. I mean,
should I turn my red light on too?
You do it.
If I do it, it'll look crazy in here.
Yeah, you use the word Nazi probably like 4 or 5 times during this interview, and I just want to point out. I mean, this is a little seed to plant or a rabbit hole. Journalist Conrad Hayden, Konradheiden. He was a journalist that invented the term Nazi to discredit the National Socialist, and basically the National Socialist was just a national pride kind of organization. If someone's to be a proud American, right? It's like the same deal. And that was used by Marxist Bolshevik agitators to destabilize Russia. And that was kicked off in 1917 with the Holodomor, where they killed Tsar Alexander II in cold blood. They murdered his whole family in his own house when it was supposed to be like a photo shoot. They just opened fire on his women, children. And then Russia was hijacked. And then 5 million Europeans were murdered. And it was the first of 3 genocides that happened in Europe. So, I mean, these are things we just hear the word Nazi and it's like, but no one knows about the Holodomor, right? Where 5 million Europeans were murdered. So it's, there's definitely rabbit holes to go down for sure. And, history is not I think this connects. I mean, what did they do with all the World War II leftovers? They put it into the NPK fertilizer. So it's not just NPK fertilizer, it's NPK fertilizer with a bioweapon put in it. with spent ammunition put in it, right? And that's growing our food.
And in the first episode of The Truth About Cancer, which is free on YouTube, within the first 20 minutes of that movie, they go into the history of chemotherapy, which is the same thing. It was a contest. It was the contest winner came up with chemotherapy, so they didn't have to throw out stockpiles of nerve gas. He had repurposed it into something they could package and sell medically. Right. And if we're talking about fluoride, right, that's the same thing that came out of the Manhattan Project and the purification of plutonium, the refinement, of plutonium. And in that process, you end up with this aluminum product, this horrible, and these fluoride products. And then you end up with that in the aluminum process. And they could either have to spend infinite amounts of money doing chemical toxic disposal fees to the federal government, or they can, fudge their own studies and then sell it as this is good for your teeth.
Put it in the drinking and food. We can't dispose of this poison. Let's just put it in the food and water supply.
Right. Let's sell it. It's a $300 million lobbyist budget that the fluoride community has to put it in municipality waters. It's an enormous amount of money that they can spend. And it's just one of these things, like, people can't fathom the magnitude of the type of world that we're living inside of. But again, if you are really sick, it's not about being fearful of these things, but we have to understand that it's not a simple answer. And your Western medical doctor, like, I've now realized this, I don't blame him for not having any clue how to approach this stuff, right? The only tool in his toolbox for the bacteria that's supposed to be the only thing that Lyme is about is an antibiotic. He has one tool. And it's a terrible tool. It's absolutely terrible. It does all kinds of other problems. It eats all your hydrogen all the great bacteria that produce hydrogen in your flora. It literally, it's got all these other problems, and it only kills at best, 80% of the target bacteria, then allowing that other 20% to propagate as now this resistant bacteria. And we have these resistant staphs and all these other things. This is, but it's the only tool he's educated in. So he hears about RIFE or all these things, and they're literally not allowable from the 1936 laws, the same year that cannabis was turned into the word, just like you said, Nazi, right? So cannabis was turned into what? Marijuana. It was the two most common words in Spanish, right? Mary and uno. And they put it together, and they were able to pass this law that got rid of that got cannabis out of your doctor's hands, and in another law in the same year got all of these other therapies out of your doctor's reach. RIFE machines went away, all of the electros, like you'll lose your medical license. And they sent the FDA around at the time of RIFE and literally had them confiscate the medical devices, even if people were in treatment. They said, look, you can turn over that device or you can turn over your medical license. So it's, your doctor is not, he is, he's projected as, Dr. House, I always like to say, is the, in a world where the show House MD is like one of the biggest watched shows, that just shows you the fantasy that we want to indulge in, that our doctor, even though he might hate our guts, would really be out looking for the answer for us and would have all these, this stream of consciousness style approach to it. But this is a complete fantasy.
That was awesome. Yeah, there's so many like geopolitical aspects to what affects. I mean, we were talking about before we started recording Codex Alimentarius, and you were saying is it Germany or just Europe that
all of the EU,
all the EU supplements are illegal, right? Or they're hard to get, or it's like ridiculous. That's crazy.
There's a pharmaceutical wall now, so it's got to come from your doctor. You can't get vitamin C's and some kind of some of these different herbs over the counter are literally out of reach. Yeah, if you want to look at this is, again, not to be about fear, but to be about, if we can predict these things, then we can work on other solutions and we can understand they don't sideswipe us. Mm-hmm. But when we look at what's happening in China, I don't mean with like the coronavirus necessarily, but like all the social order of China, and then the social credit system. So they have a Facebook over there, like the countrywide Facebook, that literally, if your score is low on there, you might not be able to fly on an airplane. Like you might have to take bus for travel. You know what I mean? If you loan money to the wrong guy in your family that needs it, it could impact that social credit score. And now you have to take taxis, or, you know what I mean? Like this is real. So when you're looking at that, that's what they want to implement for social structure in the US. Like China is like, that's the guinea pig experiment for the social structure. When you look at what's happening in Australia and then the EU, but particularly Australia, that's what they want to do with the slow boil on the medical stuff. It happens in Australia first. So for instance, they've recently had, at the level of their FDA of Australia, they have disavowed nationwide any sort of homeopathy or any alternative medicines from doctors. Basically, any of those therapies are being completely disavowed at the level that we would consider like the head of our medical establishment looking down as doctors. So these are the things that I believe are coming into the US and China with the social things and the medical aspects from Australia and EU. So yeah, it's disconcerting that they put in Codex Alimentarius. I mean, it sounded like total fiction when I was reading about it 10 or 15 years ago. I remember reading it going, this is nuts. This can't exist. And now it's literally implemented.
It's like 1984.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still glad. I'm going to look like a true nut now, or a danger or whatever. But the Second Amendment we still have. I mean, I know so many law-abiding good people that, have firearms. That's a great thing, and I don't know what good that will be if, there's like, robots that are unleashed. I mean, I've been following, like, there's this guy, this weightlifter in someplace in Europe, I think it's in the Czech Republic, that's dating a robot, like literally a sex robot is his girlfriend. He has a whole Instagram of pictures with her. And, like, we're getting to like a freaky spot. I follow the whole artificial intelligence thing just because I think that's a piece of the puzzle too. And yeah, I don't know. Star Wars.
Well, it gets very interesting when you look back 100 years and you realize that Blavatsky and Steiner and these guys, from Theosophy and Anthroposophy, they told us in 100 years, this is the Earth. Everyone's going to have these personal digital devices. And they described exactly the world we're living in. Just like I mentioned, Klinghardt pointing out those 4 activators to disconnect us from our higher spirituality, and arguably the pineal gland being kind of the central organ that connects to those realms, that as far as most of us know, and that's what's primarily being attacked in the with the aluminums, the fluorides, the glyphosate, and then the EMF aspect of it. So this was described by Rudolf Steiner 100. Like this was, we're in cycles. We're in really interesting big cycles, and they were predicted.
And Revelations, right? The Holy Scriptures. We're in Revelations times. That describes it.
Absolutely. I think we are. I think we're right in the beginning of that. And I think even people that are, that have been dedicated to those studies and, the Bible and religious studies their whole life, I think most of them don't even see that, like, the patterns are there. Like we're in some really interesting times where, if you want to get to the end of your life and have your brain intact, you have to understand what it's going to take to do that. It's not a foregone conclusion that you're going to coast into your grave and have this awesome life until that point. Or, and the numbers are bearing it out. Aside from the other horrible numbers, it's the life expectancy numbers that for 3 years in a row have gone down. The public numbers, which are I always consider those a big grain of salt with those numbers, and they're going down. They can't even hide that. So,
wow, yeah, well, I'll have to have you back on, sir, because this is awesome. And I think the last question, I really wanted to get to this one because this is a nice practical one. What's the best way to keep ticks off of your body, or what to do if you see one on? Because I'm here in the forest. There's all these, backwoods around me, and there's definitely ticks here. And should I carry like tweezers in my bag and just wear like long sleeves and, wide hat and tall boots kind of thing?
Yeah, there's lots of good strategies for the outfit and for all that kind of stuff too. When it comes to ticks, it's interesting. There's a couple of really, really great solutions that aren't what you would think they are. The first one is actually, it's called Cistus tea, which is Cistus, Cistus tea. It's made from a bush in the Midwest, or in the Middle East, like grown in the desert. And this tea, so in clinical studies with animals, with dogs, what they did was they fed one group the Cistus tea, and then the other control group, just regular water, sent them out. And it was a ratio of 1 to 100 ticks per dog, I think is the number. It was a significant, if I'm not remembering that correctly, it was a 1-to-1 something. It was a much bigger number. And they would come back with these ticks not on them because whatever odor, whatever thing was being produced with the Cistus tea in the blood. Well, not only that, but Cistus tea also breaks down biofilms intelligently. So it doesn't break down, for instance, the sinus biofilms that you need, or the biofilms in your bladder, or biofilms are not all evil, right? It's not all the dark side of the force on those. It breaks down. It's an intelligent biofilm breaker. And so it's really, really good for a lot of things, but it seems to have this incredible effect of having you be left alone from a lot of these biting insects and a lot of these, not just ticks, but other ones too. I've personally experienced that. I'll be around people and everyone's getting eaten alive, and I seem to be being left alone. And that was not the case before, but that is, so that's pretty much what I'm drinking. Now I've got some tart cherry juice in my drink. So if you're seeing the video, you're seeing that I have a really red drink, but Cistus tea wouldn't look like that. It would look just like a regular brown tea. It tastes actually fantastic. It's no caffeine. It's naturally decaffeinated. So that's a huge one. It's actually a major piece of a lot of therapy in the Klinghardt method. That's a huge, like one of the first things he just puts in for you. The second thing is, I like, if I had that question earlier, I would have brought some things up here, but I carry a little tick key on my keychain. So for actually removing the tick, I always have the little key with me, but I've never needed it to this point so far. And then I also keep in my car, on my person, and around us, if I ever sort of end up even in somebody's backyard during the middle of summer or whatnot, for a party, I'll spray down, and it's called Lyme Armor. I think it's ARMOUR is how they spell it. Lyme Armor, and it's by. You should be able to easily find it. I forget the group that makes it, but it's basically a very specific. So there's a lot of essential oil research that's out there, most of which almost none of us, get exposed to because we're looking at harder core things. But these essential oils are absolutely phenomenal at covering up that whatever the mammalian smell is that comes off of us, that these ticks kind of target, and they will leave you alone. So the Lyme Armor does seem to be a really big piece of that. So those are my favorite tools right away. Really, those three: the tick removal piece, the cystis tea, and for external use, you'd spray on these essential oils. Those are sort of my favorite ways of keeping them off.
Montana Pharmacy.
And I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
What's that?
Montana Pharmacy. It's like made by Stephen Heron Buter. I have one of his books.
Yeah, that sounds Montana Pharmacy. Yeah. That's it. Montana Pharmacy. Cool. Yeah. Great stuff. I've used it for years. And I'm the guy at the party not getting feasted on. if this, even in Colorado, that can happen.
Does it work for mosquitoes too, or is it just ticks?
It seems to work pretty well for mosquitoes. For me, I don't know which creatures it doesn't work for. I'm sure there are some, but it was engineered for ticks. That was the main design of it.
Keep the reptilians.
But of course now, and there you go. But of course now we know that it's not just the ticks that are the problem. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
But you can see, even in the line of questions that we got, which were great questions, you can see that the mentality out there is still pretty mainstream, that everybody's worried about the tick, everybody's worried about the spirochete. And again, that's just that's a couple of snowflakes on the tip of the iceberg, really.
Yeah, I love what you said about the multiple layers. And from that list you showed, it looked like a good 40 layers, right? I mean, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and some people don't need all 40 layers. Like the 40 layers here are for my family is special. And we lived in a house that had incredible amounts of mold, that literally had a track record of murdering its previous homeowner occupants. So they had the husband was being wheeled out in like a Parkinson's condition, and the wife was his full-time caretaker. And we're now, we would have approached that situation had we not intervened where we did, because that's where my dad was definitely headed. Mm-hmm. That was the mold exposure. Then we found out there's radioactive contamination in the groundwater, which is coming up. They're filling the swimming pool. We had like one of the few swimming pools in Warren, Michigan, swimming in radioactive water, drinking radioactive water. I mean, it's like the amount of stuff that you wouldn't know to be aware of. Like it's like being a detective. You have to keep asking questions and go, if you haven't found the thing that helps your symptoms, then for me, it's like, okay, keep digging deeper.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah.
I mean, I think the iron and calcium in the water, like excess iron and calcium, mainly spring or well water. I mean, the iron is really food for pathogens. It's not even sugar. It's iron. That's like the real.
It is. That's been documented if you get into the research of Carnicom in all of the Morgellons research, and that is the correct pronunciation of it. It's a soft G, because it's back to it's a term from the 1400s. Although even like Carnicom himself mispronounces it, which is great. But he's the leading researcher on looking under a microscope, and he can watch these things come up to a little molecule of iron and just eat it. He's got videos of this stuff. So yeah, so we end up with these incredibly weird depletions and these huge amounts of other heavy metals that we shouldn't have. And like I've infamously said in my shows, my doctor looked at my heavy metals list and he asked if I worked on cars. He's like, because that was the only explanation for how much of the metal load. And the irony is, if he'd taken that test himself, it would have been the same.
That's wild. Well, Xiren, thank you so much for coming on the show. And
thanks, Matt.
Yeah, this was awesome. I think people are going to get a lot out of it. And there's a lot of actionable steps. And this the philosophy that you shared, I love. It's very balanced. It's a very balanced approach. It's not trying to sniper symptoms and focusing on symptoms. And that's what I always share here on my podcast. It's like, look at things more systemically. Look at the interconnections, right, between everything. Don't just focus on one little aspect of what you have going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and of course we were misled. That's my whole point about Chris Newby's book, is we were misled into looking at just the spirochete. And that was what came out, was that he had hidden all the other aspects of the creatures. So for 35 years, you had that rabid debate of like, is Lyme even real? Because, it's whether or not we can find the spirochete is one thing, but turns out it was never simple. Not from the beginning, it wasn't going to be simple. So,
wow.
The truth never is.
It never is. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully we gave some people some little rabbit
There's a
holes
lot
to
of
go.
people, and we all got free will. They all got free will. So it's never simple.
Right. Awesome. Well, hang on. And I'm going to close out the show here. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks again for having me, man. This is great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. What do you guys think of that one? Lyme is not just a spirochete. That's a big takeaway. I loved in the very beginning how he was talking about hundreds of weaponized creatures were stuffed into parasites. Not just one parasite, but multiple parasites. I mean, this really sounds like biological warfare. That's pretty evident. But I think the more important question is, how do we stay strong and keep the immune system strong so that it can identify and destroy these pathogens, right, that get into the body? And I think they're going to get in no matter what, right? I mean, geoengineering, aerosol sprays in the sky, we're going to breathe that in, right? Glyphosate's airborne, we're going to breathe that in. So it's less about living in a bubble or a cave and trying to avoid toxins and pathogens, but just creating a body that's strong, right? And that could resist barrages of pathogens and toxic chemicals and such. And to me, that really comes down to ATP production, really maximizing energy production in the cell. And that's way easier said than done. I think a lot of people talk about that and they'll take different supplements for it. It's really about getting the cellular machinery functioning again. And even with that, you'll have people argue with me and say there's different methods of doing that and no supplements required. I absolutely disagree. I think supplements are required to heal the cell and to fix the body at a fundamental level. And I have the CLF protocol where I lay all that out. But basically taking care of calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis, because if you can't get oxygen to the tissue, you don't have that terminal electron acceptor. How are you supposed to make ATP? If you're magnesium deficient because you have iron overload and you have all this chronic accumulation causing stress and increasing your magnesium burn rate, and you're magnesium deficient, you can't make mag ATP, as Morley talks about, Morley Robbins, right? So there are all these pieces that come together, and I think a lot of people are taking supplements that are useless, like to me, cod liver oil and omega-3s and algae oil and all these nootropics and things. I'm really not a fan. I think we should really start at the foundational level, and that's with minerals and enzymes and vitamin E, right? And these like fundamental factors, but especially the minerals, because enzymes require minerals to function, like magnesium. 42% of your enzymes are magnesium dependent. So that's a big one. And it's overlooked because you get a blood test and it's serum magnesium. It's not RBC magnesium. Remember, with blood tests, they're usually looking in the wrong spot. So if you got blood work done, I get them sent to me all the time. They usually don't tell you much, even with a thyroid test, because they're not looking at reverse T3 and all of these other factors. With the thyroid, they're just looking at T3, T4. I mean, same thing with iron. They're looking in the wrong spot. You can have enough copper, but ceruloplasmin activity can be low. Ceruloplasmin levels and activity can be low. So it's very complex, and usually the lab tests will not tell you much. unless it's the full Monty iron panel, which I recommend everyone start with, and that will show you your red blood cell magnesium level. So all that to say, don't get caught up in the really advanced stuff, molecular hydrogen, nootropics, all of these things, because people will push you into these very advanced, unnecessary, very expensive things that aren't getting at the root. To me, it makes sense to take systemic enzymes every day in a plastic-free capsule like I have with Mitolife Dissolve It All that go through and dissolve scar tissue. Everyone has scar tissue because everyone has inflammation, because a lot of us were raised in the American experiment with iron filings in our freaking cereal. And not to mention vegetable oil in everything we ate, right? Fried and canola oil. And our parents did their best, right? But they're hidden in a lot of foods, a lot of processed foods. One of the first ingredients, these vegetable oils. And vegetable oil, canola oil and algae oil, there's zero difference to me. They're the same poison. They're just as toxic. Krill oil, fish oil, cod liver oil, I put it in the same exact level as canola oil, rapeseed oil. It's the same thing. So that's why I think we need vitamin E. I wrote an essay on my Mitolife page about my PUFA Protect product, which I think is huge. And it's one of your body's primary antioxidants. So talking about Lyme disease, right? The immune system taking a hit, the immune system not being able to take care of these invaders. Well, we have vitamin C and we have vitamin E and we have glutathione. And we need magnesium for our entire immune system to work, obviously. But we also need vitamin E, which you're not getting enough from almonds or a handful of nuts every day because the PUFAs in there counteract it and you actually absorb less of the vitamin E. I think we need supplemental vitamin E, at least for a little while. You might not have to take it forever. People always ask me that. Do I have to be on the CLF protocol forever? Well, it depends. If you still live your degenerate ways, right, and living the way you were before, partying a lot, it depends. I mean, we have to live our life, but you really have to assess what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And if you do the CLF protocol for 6 months and then you're all good, but you keep living the same way, then yeah, those things are probably going to come back. It really depends at what level you're at, but sometimes healing and rebalancing can take years. I believe that's the case with lipofuscin. I mean, we're talking about complexed iron and PUFAs caught in the tissue. That's going to take a while to get out of there. So anyway, that's enough ranting. I like what Xiren's doing. I like that he focuses on the big picture and not just, destroying pathogens and killing, as he talks about in the show. I like that about him. And he has great videos on his website, knowhowthingswork.com. I'll put the link below. He talks about EMFs and just different strategies that he uses. The silver pulsar from Sota, which I'm a huge, huge fan of. I've been using that for years. He has the magnetic pulsar video, which is awesome. Just a lot of great stuff. And like I said, I don't agree with everything, but that's fine, right? I mean, he still has a lot of the picture. And so I always encourage people, even with me, don't just believe everything I say and just do everything I say. Get a combination of different people's input, right? And then kind of do your own thing and go from your experience too. But his YouTube channel's really cool, and definitely check out the videos that you're drawn to on there. I think he has some of the best information out there on Lyme disease. If you'd like to support my work, go to matt-blackburn.com. I have blogs up there, just threw a recipe up there. Going to be adding recipes over time. All my recommended products are up there with discount codes. And if you go to mitolife.co, you'll see my brand, which I'm coming out with a few new products in the next couple weeks I'm really excited about. I'll announce those shortly. But for now, I have enzyme products, Shilajit, and vitamin E called PUFA Protect. I actually just lowered the price of the gluten savior and the vitamin E. And so the gluten saver I will be discontinuing at some point once those run out of stock. And the vitamin E, I'm actually upgrading the formula. And so the current stock is discounted. And if you use the code first time, you can save 15%. So one word, first time, and get 15% off your first order. You just have to select one-time purchase. Make sure you don't try to enter it with a subscription because it won't work. So thank you guys so much for your support. I really appreciate you listening to the show. If you benefited from the show, it really means a lot if you send a link to your friend of an episode that you liked and someone that you think could listen to it, a friend or a family member, because that's really how this will grow and we'll reach more people and we'll be able to help more people, is through you guys. So really appreciate that. Today's quote is by John Rochelle. You can't teach calculus to a chimpanzee, so just share your banana.